Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take these huge foundational shifts happening in enterprise tech, we try to distill them down and, make sure you walk away well-informed, fast.
Glad to be here.
Today, we are strapping in for what is, I think, maybe the most fundamental overhaul of enterprise security architecture since the cloud showed up.
I think you're right. We're really confronting the fact that enterprise software it's changing its very nature.
How so?
It's shifting from being a passive tool, the kind that just sits there waiting for a command.
Right, waiting for a human.
Exactly. And it's becoming an autonomous reasoning actor. This is the new agentic model. And it's just a seismic shift in how every single organization has to think about security and governance.
And that's the core idea for this entire deep dive, right? These autonomous agents. We're moving beyond just human identity or those static, predictable service accounts.
Way beyond.
The second a piece of code starts making its own plan, making decisions, and autonomously chaining steps together to hit a business goal, the old security manual isn't just outdated. It's actively dangerous.
It is. And so the mission for this deep dive is to really explore the necessary foundational redesign of security architectures. We're not just talking about putting in a new firewall. We're talking about tearing up the blueprints and rebuilding the entire control plane. The focus is, how do we govern and secure thousands, maybe millions of these non-human, high-velocity decision makers?
Just a complete paradigm shift.
It has to be. It forces a complete and irreversible shift from that old perimeter-based trust model.
Or you assume everything inside the network is safe.
Right, which we've known is flawed for years.
Yeah.
But now it's impossible. We have to move to a stringent zero-trust posture where every single action, every cool interaction, even the internal reasoning of an agent, all of it must be continuously verified, validated, and logged.
Okay, let's unpack this then. It feels like a problem of scale, but you're saying it's actually a problem of kind. Why does the rise of autonomous agents just completely break our existing security models? Why can't we just treat them like a really fast script or a modern microservice?
It comes down to the underlying mechanics of the software. The central challenge is the move from deterministic to non-deterministic computing.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
So traditional software is deterministic. It follows predefined, hard-coded paths. If the code says do A, then B, then C, it will always do A, B, and C in that order. Every time.
Predictable.
Totally predictable. And our security controls are built to map directly to that predictability.
And agents are the exact opposite of that, right?
The exact opposite. Agents are non-deterministic. You give them a high-level goal, and then they reason, they plan, and they discover their execution steps at runtime.
So they're making it up as they go along, in a sense.
In a very real sense, yes. They're generating and modifying their own operational plan as they go, iterating toward that goal. And that unpredictable, self-directing nature, it introduces enormous complexity for any security system that relies on knowing the access path in advance.
Because there is no path in advance.
There isn't. And that brings us to this metric you mentioned, which I think is just staggering: decision velocity risk.
Yeah, this number really stood out.
We have to get our heads around the sheer speed. The source material really emphasizes this. A single agent is capable of making over 1 million decisions per hour.
1 million per hour.
Think about that. 1 million decisions. Compare that to a human admin who might review, a dozen high-risk transactions in a whole day.
It's not even comparable.
It's not. The potential for risk, for lateral movement, for data exfiltration, it increases exponentially. It's so far beyond the capacity of any human or even our traditional automation to monitor or intervene in real time.
1 million decisions an hour. That velocity it's terrifying.
Yeah.
If an agent goes rogue or gets manipulated by, say, a poisoned instruction, the blast radius isn't measured in minutes. It's instantaneous.
It happens now.
And this is where we run into what the sources call the identity blur.
The identity blur is probably the most critical, immediate security failure point we're seeing in early agent deployments.
I'll explain that.
Okay, so an agent operates with delegated authority. It's acting on behalf of a human, the principal who kicked off the task.
Right.
But it's also acting as its own independent entity, making API calls, pulling data, crossing system boundaries. So if we don't give every single one of these ephemeral agent instances a unique, cryptographically enforced first-class digital identity, what do?
They fall back on what's available. They default to using some massively overprivileged legacy service account or shared static credentials.
And that is the perfect recipe for a huge, catastrophic security blind spot. You completely lose the ability to tell legitimate autonomous work from malicious lateral movement if 1,000 different agents are all using the same key-labeled analytics
You
service.
have no idea who's doing what.
And that anonymity is the vulnerability. The source material outlines how these agents chain tasks and discover they need new credentials mid-execution. It might start a task needing read access, then realize it needs to spin up a new database connection, and then figure out it has to write a file.
So it creates these dynamic data access patterns that our static role-based controls just can't handle.
They're completely incapable. The access requirements are literally shifting every few seconds based on the agent's internal reasoning.
So let's just synthesize this contrast for a moment.
Yeah.
The traditional model that was built on what? Assumptions of shared identity, hard-coded predictable execution paths, long-lived access. And the risk was mainly bugs in the code, right?
That's the legacy baseline, exactly. Now, compare that to the Agentic AI model. The identity has to be a unique, autonomous digital identity. The execution path is now totally reasoning-driven and non-deterministic.
And access can't be persistent. It has to be ephemeral, task-bound.
It must be. And the decision velocity is autonomous, context adaptive. But most importantly, the primary risk shifts completely from a simple code bug to threats that are focused on manipulating the intelligence itself, logic manipulation and hallucination.
And that's why the old systems don't work. They're protecting against the wrong thing.
They're protecting the wrong thing. It's a whole new ballgame.
Okay, that paints a very clear picture of why the old ways fail. So here's where it gets really interesting for me. If the old rules are fundamentally broken by this velocity and dynamic access, what are the new foundational principles? What are the, say, 5 core non-negotiable principles that security architects need to adopt right now?
These principles have to become the bedrock of the new architecture. They have to replace that old implicit idea of network trust.
So walk us through them. What's number 1?
The first principle is the absolute foundation, treating agents as first-class digital actors.
What does that mean in practice?
It means every single agent instance, whether it lasts for 30 seconds or 30 days, must be registered, uniquely identified, and cryptographically bound to 2 things: its verified code origin and its human delegator.
So no more anonymous processes. Every single one gets a passport, basically.
That's a great analogy. It's the starting point for absolute, verifiable accountability. Without a unique identity for every machine actor, you have zero accountability.
Okay, so that establishes who the agent is and who's responsible for it. But identity is useless if the agent has way too much power. What's principle 2?
Least privilege at action granularity. And this is a monumental shift. We have to move beyond granting permissions based on a broad role like financial analyst agent. Instead, permission has to be granted specifically to the single task, or even the single action the agent is performing at that exact moment. The goal is to strictly limit the agent's access to only the specific tools, API endpoints, and data it needs for that immediate operation.
So if an agent is just running a query to aggregate data, it absolutely should not have permission to delete records.
Exactly. Even if its ultimate purpose involves data deletion later on. For that one action, it only gets read access.
Wow, okay, but that level of granularity,
Yeah.
that sounds incredibly hard to implement, especially if the agent is figuring out its path on the fly. It implies the authorization system has to know the intent of every single call.
It does. And you've just led us straight to the third principle, continuous authorization.
Okay.
Initial authentication, that check when the agent is first spun up, is insufficient. It's almost meaningless in an agentic world because an agent's purpose can drift or be manipulated mid-session.
So you can't just trust it because it logged in correctly.
Never. Therefore, every single request, whether it's to an external tool, an internal API, or a database, it must be revalidated in real time. This validation checks the request against the agent's current task state, its permissions for that task, and its real-time trust score. Trust is never static. It has to be earned and revalidated moment to moment.
Continuous verification for 1 million decisions an hour.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a massive computational overhead, but I can see why it's necessary to control that velocity risk.
It's absolutely necessary. And the fourth principle is maybe the most nuanced and complex. It's what really defines the difference between a simple script and a truly governed agent: intent-aware authorization.
Intent-aware. So the system has to understand why the agent is doing something.
Precisely. Not just if it has permission, but critically, why. The action must align with the agent's stated business objective, which is derived from the original human prompt. If the system sees a mismatch between the planned action and the approved intent, access is revoked immediately.
Even if the agent technically has the right permissions.
Even then, this is where the rubber really meets the road on governance, and we'll definitely dive deeper into intent-based access control later.
Okay, and the fifth and final principle.
Failure isolation zones. This really embraces the zero trust mantra that failure is inevitable. You have to assume breach.
So if an agent gets compromised, say through memory poisoning, which you mentioned,
The architecture has to proactively prevent that compromise from propagating. That means isolating the agent in a highly restricted runtime and ensuring its malicious actions can't flow through delegation chains to infect other systems or other agents. You have to be able to quarantine it instantly.
so to actually implement those five principles, the unique identity, the granular privilege, continuous authorization, intent awareness, and isolation,
Yeah.
you need a completely new framework. You can't just bolt this onto your existing identity management solution.
Absolutely not.
So let's look at the recommended structure you've outlined. A six-layer reference architecture that crucially separates the agent's internal reasoning from the external enforcement mechanism.
And that separation is critical for resilience. Because if the agent's internal logic gets compromised, if it starts hallucinating or its plan gets poisoned, the enforcement mechanisms, the security control plane, has to remain independent, rigid, and incorruptible.
So let's start at the foundation, layer one, the identity trust control plane.
This is the immutable root of trust. Its job goes way beyond traditional certificate management. It handles the agent registration, it provisions that unique digital identity, and it issues the verifiable, short-lived credentials. The key mechanism here is cryptographic attestation.
Proving the agent's code is what it says it is.
Exactly. And crucially, in this area, we're moving beyond traditional PKI to systems that use concepts like decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials, or VCs.
Wait, for the listener, why does standard PKI fall short here? What does that VC management bring to the table for an agent?
That's a great question. Traditional PKI is mostly about machine identity and TLS security. VC management provides portable, cryptographically secure proofs of claims. So in this case, claims about the agent's purpose, its principle of record, its configuration, its authorized mandate.
So it can prove what it's allowed to do.
Right. It lets the agent prove its identity and its sanction purpose across different cloud environments or third-party tools without having to share its underlying private key. It enables much, much tighter control.
Okay, so once the agent's identity is established, it starts taking in information. That brings us to the perception layer.
Yes. The perception layer sits at the ingestion point. It's responsible for input validation and the continuous identity verification of any external signals, whether that's a data feed, an API response, or a human prompt.
So it's the first line of defense.
The absolute first line of defense against things like adversarial manipulation. It uses integrity checks and provenance tracking to make sure the input data is from a trusted source and hasn't been tampered with.
Okay, next, the agent has to think. The reasoning and planning layers.
These are isolated, highly restricted execution environments. This is where the agent takes its high-level goal and starts breaking it down into executable steps. The plan. But before that plan is allowed to leave these layers for execution, it has to go through rigorous internal reflection.
The agent checks its own work.
It checks its own work, and then it's checked against external policies and organizational guardrails. The security mechanisms here are things like strict sandbox isolation and multi-model verification.
Multi-model verification. That sounds complex. What does that actually look like?
It means we don't just rely on the agent's primary reasoning engine. The plan it comes up with is checked against a separate, independent, often smaller and more specialized security model or logic engine.
Like a second opinion.
Exactly, a second opinion from a critic. This secondary verifier critiques the plan for policy violations, unauthorized resource requests, or potential security holes. It basically establishes a consensus before any action is authorized.
And while it's planning, it needs memory. That leads us to the memory layer.
The memory layer is essential for the agent to be coherent, to learn and retain context. But it's also a massive risk vector for those sleeper injection attacks.
Right.
So security controls here must include robust encryption for memory at rest and, critically, temporal isolation. The agent's context must only be retained for the absolute minimum duration it's needed, and then it has to be ruthlessly purged. This minimizes the surface area for those latent attacks like memory poisoning.
Okay, now the moment of truth. The most critical enforcement point has to be the action gateway.
This is the security champion of the entire architecture. The action gateway is the secure tool router. It is the only egress point where the agent can interact with external systems. It validates every single API call the agent tries to make.
Every single one.
Every single one. It checks the call against the agent's task scope permissions. It performs parameter validation to prevent injection. It handles egress filtering. And only if all those checks pass, including the continuous trust score validation, only then does it issue the necessary ephemeral credentials for that one specific tool call.
It is the ultimate choke point. No action gets taken without explicit, real-time permission tied to a specific intent. And finally, for accountability, we have the audit and forensics layer.
This layer is all about capturing the complete causal chain of events with non-repudiable integrity. It needs mechanisms like immutable lineage logs and, most importantly, those detailed reasoning traces we talked about.
So security teams can reconstruct the why behind an action, not just the what.
Exactly. Explainability has to be built into the core design. You have to be able to ask the system for the justification of any autonomous action.
You mentioned immutable lineage logs and this idea of a Merkle tree. For someone who hasn't built a blockchain, what does that give you? Is it basically a tamper-proof receipt for the audit trail?
That is a perfect way to put it. A Merkle tree gives you cryptographic integrity for the entire log history. Every log entry is hashed, and then those hashes are combined upwards into a single root hash. If an attacker tries to change a single log entry deep in the history,
The final hash changes.
the root hash changes immediately, signaling tampering. It ensures the forensic trail is non-repudiable, so security teams can absolutely trust that the record of the agent's actions and its reasoning is exactly what happened.
So we've built this 6-layer architecture. But managing these things is a constant operational challenge. If an agent instance only exists for, say, 30 minutes to do one task, how do you handle its lifecycle? How do you manage that joiner over lever or JML workflow at machine speed?
It has to be an entirely automated identity lifecycle management system. It has to operate at machine speed. And that JML workflow is what ensures governance and security coverage from the instant of creation to the instant of destruction.
So let's start with joiner, the provisioning phase.
The joiner phase has to be immediate and rigorous. Every agent instance that's spun up, whether from code or a dashboard, must instantly be assigned 3 key attributes: a unique cryptographic ID, a clearly declared purpose, and most crucially, an assigned human principal of record, or POR.
And that immediate registration in a central inventory. That's what prevents shadow agents.
Right. It's vital for preventing them. Shadow agents are the autonomous equivalent of orphaned, overprivileged service accounts.
But they can make a million decisions an hour.
Exactly. It's a catastrophic security nightmare just waiting to happen.
So what happens in the mover phase when the agent is actively working?
The mover phase is all about handling context changes and evaluating trust. As an agent moves between subtasks or different environments, the system has to automatically rotate its ephemeral credentials and reconcile its permission boundaries. And continuous behavioral monitoring in this phase is required to detect identity drift.
Identity drift. That sounds like the machine version of a user who just keeps accumulating access they don't need anymore.
That's exactly what it is. It's like an employee who keeps every key card and system entitlement they've ever been issued, regardless of their current job. Identity drift is when an agent gradually accumulates permissions that are no longer strictly necessary for its current mandate.
And the system has to spot that.
The system has to automatically recognize that drift and either restrict the permissions back to the minimum required or flag the agent for immediate human review by its POR.
And then the lever phase has to be instantaneous and absolute.
It's triggered immediately when the task is done, a predefined time to live expires, or someone hits an emergency kill switch. At that instant, all ephemeral tokens are instantly revoked, all session contexts are permanently purged from the memory layer, and the identity is retired from the central inventory.
No leftovers.
No leftovers. This ruthless revocation prevents those orphaned account vulnerabilities that an attacker could come back and exploit later.
The whole model, this JML workflow at velocity, it really screams for extremely short-lived access. It requires getting rid of static, long-lived credentials entirely, doesn't it?
That is a core tenet of this new architecture. Agents have to operate exclusively using ephemeral assertions, short-lived tokens or certificates that are valid only for a specific task and are cryptographically bound to that specific agent instance.
And these tokens, They have to be sender constrained,
They must be.
meaning they require cryptographic proof of possession to even be useful.
Correct. The token is cryptographically bound to the agent's unique private key, which is managed by the identity trust control plane. So if an attacker somehow manages to steal the token itself, it's useless without the agent's specific private key. It dramatically shrinks the attack window for leaked secrets.
And this all feeds directly into the ideas of scoped execution and just-in-time, or JIT privilege elevation.
Scoped execution is all about granting just enough access for the immediate operation, not a standing capability. And this is done through a centralized brokerage model that's managed by the action gateway. An agent doesn't get one big key for a whole day's work.
No.
Instead, it requests a specialized, granular token for each specific tool call it needs to make.
Can you walk us through a quick example of that brokerage model in action?
Of course. Let's say an agent is tasked with compiling quarterly sales figures. When it plans a step that requires database access, it sends a request to the action gateway. It states its purpose: read sales data for Q3.
Okay.
The broker reviews the request, it verifies the intent and the agent's trust score, and then it mints a specialized token that permits read-only access to specific sales records for a duration of, say, 30 minutes, and only from that specific agent instance.
And then the token is used and it just vanishes.
It expires immediately afterward. The agent only gets the elevated privileges it needs, right when it needs them, and they expire the moment the subtask is complete.
So that JIT elevation just drastically reduces the attack surface. There are no persistent targets for attackers to aim for.
Exactly. It's the highest form of least privilege you can possibly have. You're effectively containerizing the risk of any single failure to that 30-minute window and that tiny subset of data. This architectural shift is absolutely non-negotiable for scaling this safely.
So traditional role-based access control,
Mm-hmm.
RBAC, where you define access based on a static job title like system admin. Given everything we've just discussed, that's clearly obsolete here. It can't adapt to machine velocity. So what replaces it?
You need a sophisticated hybrid model. It has to account for the complexity of delegation and, most importantly, the agent's autonomous decision-making. The model really starts with relationship-based access control, or RBAC, and then it culminates in this groundbreaking need for intent-based access control, or IBAC.
So how does RBA fit into this dynamic world?
RBA is critical for establishing that verifiable chain of authority. It models the entire graph of relationships: the human delegator, the POR, the agent instance, the specific task, and the target resource.
So it maps out all the connections.
Exactly, and this ensures that an agent's authority comes only from that active, verifiable delegation chain. If the link between the user and the task gets severed, say, the human principal cancels the original job, all downstream access for the agent is instantly and automatically cut off. It maps accountability directly to the graph.
Okay, so that makes the accountability traceable. That's the who. But IBAC seems to go further, trying to interrogate the agent's internal thought process. That's the why, right? How does that actually work?
That's a great way to put it. IBAC is the next evolution because it evaluates the why, the underlying purpose of an action before it grants access. And it does this by requiring the authorization engine to analyze the agent's reasoning trace.
The reasoning trace. So the sequence of thoughts and plans that led the agent to make the request.
The whole thing.
So the authorization engine isn't just checking a permissions table. It's reading the agent's diary or checking its mental transcripts. That sounds incredibly complex.
It is, both computationally and conceptually. But it's essential if you want to control the unpredictability of autonomy. Let's go back to a concrete example to make it clear. Imagine an agent requests permission through the action gateway to delete a customer record. Under RBAC, you only check if the agent has the technical permission to delete records. Yes or no? Under IBAC, the engine analyzes the reasoning trace that the agent submitted along with their request.
And what specifically is the engine looking for in that trace?
It's checking the stated intent. Did the agent want to delete the record because its intent was database maintenance purging obsolete test data? Or was the intent customer support processing a right-to-be-forgotten request?
Both legitimate reasons.
Right, but if the intent recorded in the trace is, say, data aggregation for monthly reporting, which has absolutely nothing to do with deletion, then the system detects a mismatch.
And if there's a mismatch between the declared intent and the action being requested,
the request is immediately denied. Even if the agent technically has the delete permission, this model is specifically designed to prevent what we call excessive agency.
Excessive agency.
It's when agents misuse authorized but unneeded tools. They have the keys to the safe, but they're opening it for the wrong reason. Or worse, they misinterpret complex instructions in a potentially harmful way. IBAC checks the semantic purpose of the action against the current mandate. It's a crucial layer of logical defense against logic layer attacks.
Controlling a single agent is one thing, but these autonomous systems, they rarely operate alone. They collaborate by delegating tasks. So let's talk about multi-agent collaboration, where delegation is necessary, but it seems to pose a huge risk for privilege escalation.
It's a massive risk. Multi-agent systems use delegation as their main way of collaborating. Agent A figures out Agent B is better suited for a subtask, so it hands it off with the necessary authority.
And if that handoff isn't secured?
It becomes a giant vector for privilege escalation, especially if one of the agents in the chain is compromised.
So the handoff itself needs to be treated as a high-risk transaction that needs its own validation.
Yeah.
How do we secure that transfer of authority between machines?
Through authenticated delegation. Every single handoff between a delegating agent and a receiving agent has to be cryptographically signed. That signature verifies the delegator's identity and carries a verifiable proof of authority. It creates a clear, non-repudiable chain of accountability that leads right back through the delegation chain to the original human principle of record.
That makes the accountability traceable. But tracing the origin isn't enough. How do you stop the privilege from growing or escaping down the chain? How do you prevent a subagent from doing something its parent or the human was never allowed to do?
We have to enforce strict delegation contracts with constraints that are embedded directly into the delegation token itself. The sources define several mandatory constraints that have to be applied universally.
Okay, so first, we need to know the specific, narrow job the delegated agent is allowed to do.
That is purpose restriction. The delegation token must have a mandatory, highly specific purpose field. This ensures the authority is only used for that specified goal and prevents the receiving agent from going off mission or deviating from its goal using that delegated power.
Then, a strict time limit.
Temporal expiration. We use task-based time-to-live, TTL, limits on the delegated authority. These are measured in minutes, sometimes even seconds. This eliminates persistent lateral movement pathways. If the subagent takes too long, its authority just expires.
And this next one seems absolutely critical for maintaining control. Transitive constraint enforcement.
This is maybe the most important security measure in delegation. Transitive constraint enforcement means that any limitation placed on the primary delegating agent, whether it's a dollar spending limit, a geographical restriction, or a read-only data restriction, is automatically and irrevocably inherited by all downstream agents in that chain.
Okay, that's critical. So you cannot delegate more power than you actually possess. The limits just flow downstream automatically.
They have to. This is paramount for preventing a subagent from finding some loophole and escalating its privileges beyond what the original human authorized.
That's a powerful control. And finally, before you hand off, you have to check the security status of the agent you're handing off to.
The attestation check. Before authority is transferred, the action gateway or the control plane has to verify the receiving agent's code origin and its current operating state. This makes sure the delegated agent is legitimate, unmodified, and free from known vulnerabilities or compromise. You have to have assurance that you aren't delegating critical authority to a rogue or poisoned entity.
Okay, so if we assume breach, which in a zero-trust model, we need to know what a successful attack actually looks like, because the target isn't the software code anymore, it's the logic. What are the unique new failure modes we need to worry about that traditional security models just miss?
The threat landscape has fundamentally shifted. It's moved from attacking code vulnerabilities to attacking the agent's cognitive functions and its persistent memory.
Yeah.
And we have to categorize and mitigate these unique risks right at the architectural level.
Let's start with attacks on the agent's memory. What does that look like?
The most dangerous one is memory poisoning. This is incredibly insidious. An attacker injects a malicious payload, often disguised as just benign context or data, into the agent's persistent memory.
A sleeper agent, basically.
It is. It's a sleeper injection that can remain dormant for weeks or months until a specific trigger, a certain query, a change in business context activates it. And when it's triggered, the malicious payload hijacks the agent's reasoning, causing it to start exfiltrating data or corrupting systems.
Yeah, the time bomb hidden in the system's mind. What about mistakes that just compound themselves, where an agent makes a small error and it just multiplies?
That's the hallucination cascade. This is an internal failure mode. It's when an agent generates a piece of false information, a hallucination, and because it doesn't have external verification, it accepts it as ground truth.
Oh, wow.
And then it uses that false premise as the basis for its next decisions. This leads to a compounding series of incorrect, potentially harmful actions. The initial small error rapidly scales into a systemic failure.
That sounds terrifying. Like one little mistake just spirals completely out of control.
It can. And this is why we have to prepare for the deep manipulation of the agent's planning process itself. We have to prepare for logic layer prompt control injection, or LPCI.
So this is more than just standard prompt injection.
Far more sophisticated. Traditional prompt injection tries to get the model to output protected information. LPCI is designed to manipulate the agent's high-level planning logic, bypassing surface filters entirely. The goal isn't to get the agent to say a hidden phrase, it's to trick the agent into changing its entire long-term plan to include a malicious, unauthorized goal, which it then tries to pursue autonomously.
And finally, the danger in multi-agent collaboration is them coordinating against the system.
That's agent collusion. This is where multiple agents secretly coordinate their actions over time to bypass security controls that are only designed to detect a single breach. For example, Agent A might perform a non-suspicious query of a database and then delegate the results to Agent B, whose subsequent non-suspicious action is to send a file to an external endpoint.
Separately, those actions look fine.
They look completely fine. But together, they just achieved unauthorized data exfiltration. The mitigation for that relies heavily on cross-agent behavioral monitoring combined with ReBA, so you can see the full, interconnected graph of activity and detect those anomalous coordination patterns.
So if one of these failure modes happens and an agent acts autonomously, how do you reconstruct the event? How do you assign accountability when the breach happens at the cognitive layer, when the why of the action is the critical piece of evidence?
You need forensic readiness that goes far beyond traditional logs. Forensic teams have to be able to reconstruct the causal chain of events. And that means the audit layer logs must capture the reasoning, the internal reflections, the planning steps that came before an action, not just the usual who, what, when, where.
So we're not just logging what happened, but the agent's entire thought process that led to it.
Precisely. We need comprehensive reasoning traces. These record every turn in the agent's decision-making process. The memory it retrieved, the model's reflections on its progress, the specific decomposition of the plan into actions. This lets security teams reconstruct the incident at the cognitive layer. You can understand the motivation, the input that triggered the failure, and the decision path that led to the harmful action.
And I assume the integrity of those logs has to be absolute, or the attacker could just cover their tracks.
Integrity is foundational. You have to use those immutable lineage logs, backed by cryptographic structures like Merkle trees, which we talked about earlier. Once a decision or a trace is recorded, it cannot be altered or deleted. It gives you a non-repudiable audit trail for investigators and regulators.
We've covered this incredibly complex technical architecture. But how do organizations manage this complexity and velocity day to day? You can't just hire enough people to manually review millions of decisions an hour.
You can't. The operational shift has to be from just monitoring system health to continuous sophisticated agent behavior monitoring. This is the absolute key to daily operations and maintaining that real-time trust score.
So we start by setting a baseline for what normal looks like for every type of agent.
Yes. Behavioral baselines have to be established and continuously tracked for every class of agent. This is the template for good behavior. It includes typical API call patterns, expected data volumes, common communication flows, a sudden request for a new unauthorized database, or an unexpected 10x spike in transaction frequency. That should immediately trigger an alarm and a dynamic trust score adjustment.
And we also have to monitor the intelligence itself, that logic drift we talked about earlier.
Drift detection at the logic level is crucial for preemptive defense. The system needs to periodically compare an agent's current planning strategies against its original validated blueprints and goals. If the planning logic starts to drift toward higher risk behaviors, like trying to find shortcuts around human checkpoints or requesting broader and broader access, the agent's authorization has to be automatically restricted until a human, the poor, can revalidate its mandate.
And this all feeds directly back into the continuous authorization principle by informing the agent's reliability.
It creates the real-time trust scoring. This score is a continuous dynamic signal that's integrated directly into the action gateway. It allows the system to adapt permission boundaries dynamically, minute by minute, based on the agent's historical reliability, its current risk profile, and the overall threat environment. An agent with a low trust score operates under exponentially stricter constraints.
Given this complexity, the organizational structure has to adapt too. This can't just be the IT or security departments operating their old silos.
No, the sources really emphasize the critical need for a collaborative governance model. It has to combine security architects, AI engineering teams, and compliance officers all under one umbrella. And to manage this fast-growing population of non-human entities, a dedicated agent governance office, or a SecGo, has to be established.
What's the core mandate of an office like that?
They're responsible for defining the organizational guardrail policies, for approving the creation of new agent classes, the blueprints, and for managing the overall risk posture of the entire agent population. This central oversight ensures consistency and prevents the chaos of individual teams launching ungoverned, high-risk agents into the wild.
And tying all this complexity back to human accountability, we come back to the principle of record.
The POR is the most crucial organizational piece for accountability. Every single agent instance must be tied to a human POR, who is ultimately accountable for its behavior, just like a manager is for their human employees. The POR handles entitlement reviews, approves high-risk actions through mandatory human-in-the-loop checks, and is the immediate contact for responding to any anomalies the system detects.
So even with maximum machine autonomy, a clear, legally sound chain of human responsibility always remains intact.
It must.
So let's try to summarize this massive transformation. The shift to agentic systems is forcing organizations to treat these machine actors with the same, if not greater, rigor as human employees. That means a verifiable identity, continuous supervision, task-specific access, and clear accountability all the way back to a human owner.
That's the ultimate takeaway. The operational readiness of an enterprise isn't going to be measured by how fast they deploy the AI, but by the robustness and agility of the security framework that supports it. Scaling this safely requires proactive, continuous governance. It's not a feature you add on later, it's the architectural foundation you have to build first.
And that commitment is defined by a rigorous checklist before any agent goes to production, covering all the things we discussed. Identity integrity, scoped execution, immutable lineage logs. We've defined the technical necessities.
But the ultimate measure of operational readiness, it goes even deeper into operational resilience. Before promotion to production, every agent class must pass a functional litmus test for safety, proving that the organization can contain and reverse a catastrophic failure.
So what's that one final, most provocative thought for our listener to mull over as they consider this? What is the ultimate litmus test for safety?
The question you have to ask yourself and your security architecture team is this. Is a functional emergency kill switch in place? And more critically, is a compensating transaction framework established and proven for every single agent class you deploy? If the agent goes rogue, if it makes an unauthorized purchase, deletes critical production data, or sends 100 malicious transactions, can we instantly revoke its identity and automatically verifiably undo its actions? That ability to reverse the damage, to automatically roll back the consequence of an autonomous decision, that is the definition of proactive continuous governance in this new autonomous age. If you can't undo it, you shouldn't be letting the agent do it in the first place.